faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally with Book Talk. Today, I'll continue telling you about British historian Richard Evans's The Third Reich in Power. In the previous episode, we introduced the Nazi Party, which first stabilized social order by purging the SA, thus gaining a foothold. Then, through building public works and expanding armaments, they seemed to fulfill their promise of eliminating unemployment. But in reality, fiscal spending skyrocketed, supplies were scarce, and people's lives got tougher. By the spring of 1939, the lid on hyperinflation was about to blow off. Nazi Germany seemed poised to repeat the Weimar Republic's downfall. Yet that didn't happen. Instead, Nazi rule remained rock solid. There was almost no large-scale resistance within Germany, and Germans, like lambs led by the Nazis, step by step marched down the path of foreign aggression with no return. What kind of magic did the Nazi regime rely on to keep Germans obediently in line and plunge the entire German nation into the abyss of war and massacre? Next, I'll unravel this mystery. The next section is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 covers the harsh measures the Nazis used to consolidate rule. Part 2 introduces the Nazis' South tactics. Part 3 analyzes the mindset Germans had as they marched into war. All right, now on to Part 1, consolidating rule. What harsh measures did the Nazis use? As I said in the previous episode, although the Nazis seemed to eliminate unemployment, it came with shortages of daily goods. Ordinary folks struggled even to buy a piece of meat. And public discontent grew stronger, and if left unchecked, it could have sparked large-scale resistance. Movements challenging Nazi rule. To counter this, the Nazis adopted a series of harsh measures, aiming to crush any resistance in its infancy. From the moment they seized power, the Nazis did just that. On August 2nd, 1934, President Hindenburg died, and Hitler, as Chancellor, became head of state, marking the final collapse of the already nominal Weimar Republic and the official birth of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. That same day, Nazi supporter and Defense Minister von Blumberg devised an oath requiring all German soldiers to swear unconditional loyalty to Adolf Hitler, Führer of the German Empire and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, and pledged to defend it with their lives. As you can see, this oath equated Hitler with Germany, so loyalty to the nation became personal loyalty to Hitler, and it was unconditional. This was a key step in Nazifying the German military. By mid to late August, the entire German military had sworn the oath. Disobedient officers were either forced to retire or transferred to non-critical posts. Key military positions, from the defense minister down to division commanders, were filled with loyal Nazis, making Hitler's control over the army rock solid. Meanwhile, civil servants were also required to swear an oath, pledging unconditional loyalty to the Führer. When Hitler appeared in workplaces, civil servants had to perform the Nazi salute and shout, "Heil Hitler!" If this was just superficial, the Nazi Party's infiltration of all administrative levels was very real. Germany's traditional political system was federalism. Under the federal government, state governments like Bavaria, Saxony, and Bremen had officials elected by local citizens. They had significant autonomy that the federal government was meant to respect. But as soon as Hitler became Führer, he abolished local elections, shut down state governments, and installed Nazi-appointed governors for direct control. This move greatly strengthened Nazi control over local administrations, and they also reached into the judicial system. During the Weimar era, Germany's judiciary was independent. Judges handled cases without administrative meddling. In early 1933, the Reichstag fire happened. The Nazis tried to pin it on the German Communist Party and put their leaders on trial, but the judge acquitted them, and Hitler was furious and humiliated. After that, under Justice Minister Gertner's push, the Nazis overhauled the judiciary, purging opponents, and Gertner personally sought legal justifications for Nazi policies. However, Germany's judiciary was traditionally united, and Gertner himself resisted excessive administrative interference. Thus, Nazi infiltration of the judiciary was limited, so they created an alternative system. In April 1934, the Nazis set up the People's Court for treason trials, essentially to handle political prisoners. It had 2 professional judges and 3 lay judges. The professionals were just figureheads. Real power lay with lay judges, mostly from the SS and Gestapo, whose trials persecuted dissidents. According to statistics from 1934 to 1939, the People's Court tried about 3,400 people, mostly members of the German Communist Party, KPD, and Social Democratic Party, who were the main forces opposing the Nazis. The Nazi Party went to great lengths to suppress KPD and SPD, not just because they opposed fascism, but for deeper social reasons. The KPD and SPD had widespread influence among workers and built strong unions. With strict discipline and tight organization, the KPD also had strong social mobilization capabilities. And, for example, as late as 1934, the KPD could still organize May Day parades demanding legal protection for workers' rights.
That same year in Essen, northwest Germany, a KPD member was persecuted to death by Nazis, and 7,000 local workers gathered at his grave for a protest.
In Berlin, the heart of Nazi power, places like train stations, cinemas, banks, and hotels were everywhere. KPD distributed leaflets. This organizational power made Nazis deeply wary and became a major obstacle to their total social control. Therefore, the Nazis were determined to eliminate them at all costs. Thus, KPD and SPD were declared illegal, members arrested, assets seized, their unions dissolved. Forced underground, conventional law enforcement couldn't handle them, so Nazis turned to the secret police, the notorious Gestapo. The Gestapo was founded by Hermann Göring, who wanted a secret police outside regular systems to crush resistance. Hitler thought this was a brilliant idea, but Göring was already Nazi second-in-command and Air Force chief. Adding secret police gave him excessive power. After weighing options, Hitler transferred the Gestapo to another Nazi loyalist, Heinrich Himmler. To efficiently eliminate resistors, Hitler authorized the Gestapo to operate outside the judicial system. From then on, without judicial warrants, the Gestapo could arrest, torture, imprison without trial, even execute. Under this assault, KPD and SPD suffered devastating blows. In March 1935, the KPD's underground Berlin headquarters was wiped out, and SPD's resistance networks were crushed. By early 1936, organized resistance activities had ceased to exist within Germany. So should the Gestapo have eased up? No, they began monitoring German citizens' daily words and actions. Ordinary people could be arrested by the Gestapo for even slightly out-of-line remarks. Short-staffed, the Gestapo encouraged denunciations. Sons reporting fathers, students reporting teachers, colleagues reporting colleagues, all framed as patriotic acts. Strangers were urged to surveil each other and report immediately. For example, a Munich actor dining out casually criticized Nazi foreign policy to a couple at the next table. 2 days later, the actor was arrested by the Gestapo, clearly reported by that couple. This shows how commonplace denunciation was in Nazi Germany. In Saarbrücken, 87.5% of Gestapo tips came from denunciations. Nazis also criminalized malicious rumor-mongering with harsh penalties.
Nazis defined rumors, complaining about low civil servant pay, calling Nazi newspapers vulgar, noting Hitler was Austrian. All rumors. Offenders faced prison or concentration camps, which weren't just for Jews.
In fact, within months of 1933, Nazis built approximately 70 camps like Dachau to imprison communists, social democrats, and anyone opposing them. Consider Martin Niemöller, a Berlin Protestant pastor and ardent racist. He supported Nazis early on, denounced Jews in sermons, and voted for them in every election. But Niemöller opposed requiring pastors to swear loyalty to the regime believing politics shouldn't interfere with religion. He co-founded Pastors' Emergency League to help clergy refusing the oath. Under Niemöller's leadership, many regional Protestant churches resisted Nazification. Some churches refused to fly Nazi swastika flags, angering Nazi police who arrested Niemöller and put him on trial. The problem was, Niemöller's racist stance was well known, so the judge couldn't find evidence to convict him and had to release him. Yet, right after leaving court, the Gestapo took him away. Oh, and turns out Hitler personally ordered him sent to a concentration camp. Niemöller endured constant humiliation in the camp, beaten almost daily. His experience showed that even slight disobedience to Nazis could bring disaster, casting terror over German society, where survival meant extreme caution. Of course, Nazis knew violence alone wasn't enough. Soft tactics were needed too, balancing carrot and stick to control people. So part 2 covers Nazi soft tactics, starting with their signature tool: propaganda, brainwashing. Nazis always prioritized propaganda. Leaders like Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels were master manipulators. After seizing power, they doubled down on propaganda to cement control. In March 1933, Hitler created the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, appointing Goebbels as minister. Immediately, Goebbels vowed to make every German embrace Nazism as their backbone. To achieve this, Nazis leveraged two powerful tools: newspapers and radio. First, they banned non-Nazi media. Opposition outlets were shut down, while independent ones faced relentless pressure. Take Frankfurter Zeitung, renowned for objective reporting. Popular among intellectuals, it refused Nazi propaganda after their rise, constantly criticizing them and even mocking Hitler subtly. This won international acclaim but made it a Nazi target. Its staff faced Gestapo surveillance. Under mounting pressure, it published false info and dogma, destroying credibility and readership. Goebbels then forced major shareholders to sell to a Nazi-controlled publisher. On April 20th, 1939, Hitler's 50th birthday, the now Nazi mouthpiece Frankfurter Zeitung was gifted to him by Nazi publishing chief Max Amann, marking its death. Under Nazi crackdowns, private media either shut down or sold out. Germany's newspaper count dropped from 4,700 to 977, and they were all seized by Nazis, leaving only one type of media in the market: Nazi media, with the Völkischer Beobachter being the most influential. It was a must-read for party members and the main channel for official news. Its daily circulation reached nearly 120 copies. Nazis applied the same strategy to radio, Nazifying stations and putting them under unified control. Nazis also subsidized manufacturers to produce a cheap radio called the Volksempfänger. It was affordable, offered installment payments, and became very popular. By the eve of War II, 70% of German households had radios, spreading Nazi voices into every home. Every night from 7 to 8, all radio stations broadcast news programs made by the Nazi propaganda ministry, which everyone had to listen to.
Of course, what Nazis called news wasn't the same as real news.
Next, Goebbels brought all radio stations into the Broadcasting Association. Industries like literature, theater, film, music, and publishing also formed their own groups. They were all subordinate to the Reich Culture Chamber, overseen by the propaganda ministry. That's how Nazis controlled all information pipelines and could propagandize however they pleased. But Nazis knew that media filled only with fake news and official jargon would eventually breed resentment. Goebbels once noted that good propaganda should subtly seep into people's minds. By the time the audience realizes it, the brainwashing is complete. Upholding this idea, Goebbels often criticized official propaganda, especially films, calling them mostly vulgar, crude, and irritating. The model in Goebbels' mind was Triumph of the Will. This film was directed by renowned director Leni Riefenstahl, documenting the 1934 Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg. The propaganda ministry specially provided the director with 16 cameramen, 30 cameras, 4 trucks, and over 120 new technologies, resulting in a stunning effect. In the footage, Nazis are full of fighting spirit. Under Hitler's leadership, they turned Germany from a failed state into a vibrant powerhouse. Apart from propaganda films like Triumph of the Will, Nazi Germany's screens were actually dominated by entertainment movies. In 1938, for example, comedy films made up 49% of all releases, dramas 41%, and political propaganda films only 10%. Or, uh, this was because Goebbels believed entertainment was as crucial as propaganda. It numbed people's nerves and addicted them to sensual pleasures. Distracted from reality, the Nazis thus promoted entertainment films and encouraged cinema attendance. In 1938, Germans averaged 8 cinema visits per person, among the world's highest rates. For the same reason, pop songs and pulp fiction also flourished. Nazis even allowed foreign works if they contained no anti-fascist ideas. For instance, Margaret Mitchell's novel Gone with the Wind was hugely popular among German readers, and it sold over 300,000 copies in 4 years, making it a top bestseller. The Nazi regime also provided millions of industrial workers with entertainment like concerts, art shows, and tennis. But the most popular was the Nazi Labor Front's mass tourism service, offering cheap train tickets, hotels, and meals so workers could vacation like the rich. In 1934, 400,000 workers joined domestic tours. By 1937, it surged to 1.7 million. The Labor Front even added international routes. This was unimaginable before. Workers' dissatisfaction with Nazis and complaints about grueling labor thus eased somewhat. But if you think this made Germans obediently fall in line and die for Nazis, you're wrong. People aren't fools. They have eyes and brains. They observe, think, and spot discrepancies between reality and Nazi claims. Take mass tourism. Propaganda said cheap worker trips proved German equality and unity, where all enjoyed benefits. But what did workers actually see? Theater boxes always reserved for officials and ladies. Best hotel rooms occupied by government officers. On cruises, workers in third-class bunks while leaders took first-class cabins, even openly parading prostitutes on deck. Daily inequalities were everywhere. Nazi leaders from top to bottom were almost all corrupt. Some corruption even technically legal. For example, water and gas plants and railway bureaus were stuffed with Nazi members hired through connections. Many never worked but still got paid. And some corrupt acts don't even bother with a fig leaf. Congress Mystique was paying Nazi second-in-command Göring embezzled 15 million marks of public funds to build a palace. Nazi Labor Front leader Robert Ley openly appropriated labor funds for himself, buying villas and estates. He also renovated a train carriage filled with looted expensive furniture and world-famous paintings. For his wife's birthday, Ley casually gave her 2 luxury cars. The Labor Front owned many businesses, all staffed with Ley's cronies. On one hand, they embezzled. On the other, they flattered Ley, forming a vast network of mutual interests. You could say the Labor Front was a microcosm of the Nazi regime, rotten from top to bottom, inside and out, making it impossible to hide from the public. Nazis understood this too, so they allowed people to grumble as long as they didn't oppose Nazi rule. Meanwhile, propaganda agencies vigorously promoted the cult of personality around Hitler, leading people to believe the Führer was good. It was just those under him messing up. And this actually worked. Many political jokes circulated among the people, sharply mocking the greed of the Nazi Party. But in these jokes, Hitler was often portrayed positively. For example, one joke said, Goebbels' son visited Göring's home and saw what true luxury meant. Later, visiting Hitler's home, he found the Führer lived very modestly. Back home, he asked Goebbels, Dad, has the Führer quit the Nazi Party? Propaganda also had another trick, diverting people's anger from the Nazi Party to the Jews. The German Communist Party, Social Democratic Party, etc., were collectively called enemies of the people. Whatever troubles you faced, shortages of goods or industrial accidents, were all blamed on the enemies of the people sabotaging things. Of course, these tactics were mainly for adults. For youths, the Nazi Party had deeper designs. Young minds are malleable and not set. If brainwashed from childhood, they're easily controlled. This required purging the education system of politically unreliable teachers. So the Nazis set up investigation committees to screen teachers one by one. In Prussia alone, they reviewed 1,133 high school principals, firing 180, nearly 16%. Teachers who openly criticized the Nazis were summarily dismissed. The remaining teachers were required to promote fascism in the classroom. Nazis also mobilized students to monitor teachers. Any inappropriate remarks could be reported to school authorities or local Gestapo. For example, a female teacher in the Ruhr region was denounced by students for mocking Nazis in class. Gestapo took her away in front of the whole class. Additionally, Nazis required children aged 10 to 18 to join the Hitler Youth. In the youth, teams received systematic fascist education, studying Nazi textbooks, singing Nazi songs, and undergoing military training for future wars. In 1934, Hitler Youth had about 4 million members. By 1939, it reached 8.87 million. Nearly all German youth joined, many becoming Nazi believers. Late in World War II, with troop shortages, they formed the Hitler Youth Division from fanatical members, average age 17, inexperienced but ferocious in battle, causing heavy Allied casualties, becoming a cautionary tale of Nazi brainwashing. But did this small group of fanatics truly represent all Germans' mental state? When war broke out, were they really collectively frenzied like adrenaline-fueled zealots?
The author argues reality was far more complex.
Part 3 explores what mindset Germans truly had marching toward war. Nazis certainly had followers, especially among youth, but this didn't mean everyone was like that. The author examined vast archives, ordinary people's diaries, letters, and Gestapo records of public sentiment, discovering most were indifferent to Nazis and saw through propaganda's falsehood. Why did massive Nazi brainwashing efforts yield limited results? 3 main reasons explain this. First, their rule was too short for deep penetration. Nazis held power only 13 years total, with 5 years at war. This brief time frame made comprehensive societal transformation impossible. This was especially evident in villages, where Nazi rule relied on local authorities like pastors, teachers, landowners, and respected elders.
Thus, Nazi Party organizations couldn't penetrate villages, greatly weakening grassroots control.
In higher education, Nazis faced a similar situation. They could control primary or secondary teachers, but the same tactics didn't work on professors, social elites with high status and respect. Nazis could only rely on Nazi-supporting scholars like philosopher Martin Heidegger and educator Ernst Krieg. As for non-Nazi professors, as long as they didn't publicly criticize fascism, Nazis couldn't touch them. German universities still prioritized academic over political standards in hiring. At Bonn University, a quarter of 380 professors were secretly anti-Nazi, but too scared to speak out. Nazi members concluded, had the professors changed?
Not at all. Professors were buying it.
Beyond weak higher ed infiltration, a second reason was fascism's inherent lack of appeal. Fascism was a hodgepodge of extreme racism, nationalism, and blind worship of violence. These ideas were often self-contradictory. For example, Nazis persecuted intellectuals, anti-intellectualism, yet funded R&D promoting progress, one of many schizophrenic behaviors. This drove Goebbels mad. He couldn't stitch these borrowed ideas into a coherent system, no matter how hard he tried. Fascism was so crude that liberals, socialists, and even conservatives sneered at it. Conservative Friedrich Reich heard Hitler speak and thought The Fuhrer was utterly stupid. Later, in a Berlin nightclub, he saw drunken SS members causing chaos. In his diary, he called them a bunch of hysterical barbarians. The third reason for limited brainwashing was more pragmatic. Reality starkly contradicted propaganda. Nazis claimed Germans lived in abundance. Reality, shortages made many goods unobtainable. Nazis boasted efficiency and integrity. Reality, corruption was rampant. Everything required connections. Nazis insisted Germans shared common goals. Truth, officials sought personal gain while commoners just wanted survival. Faced with these realities, Nazi propaganda, even at full blast repeating lies endlessly, couldn't deceive mentally sound people. So in the end, the Nazis had to rely on all-pervasive surveillance to maintain control. Nazi party organizations covered every block in every city for daily monitoring. By 1939, the Nazi regime had deployed nearly 2 million people for this, keeping every resident's move under watch. Informants were everywhere: schools, factories, offices, and any action against the Nazi Party was immediately crushed. Of course, in this situation, it's hard to expect people to have any faith in fascism. By the late 1930s, a large portion of Germans had become very indifferent to Nazi rule. Take the small town of Nordheim in northwest Germany. At first, residents were thrilled when Nazis took power, hoping they'd fulfill promises to solve unemployment. But soon the residents' enthusiasm started to fade, because people found that Nazi officials only cared about their own interests, ignoring municipal projects and economic growth. They didn't bother reforming mines. Residents just did superficial things like giving Nazi salutes at meetings, attending Hitler's birthday events, and watching their words. And that permit. Thus, the townspeople and Nazi officials reached an unspoken agreement. Residents only needed to show obedience, and the Gestapo wouldn't cause trouble. As for what people truly thought, it didn't matter. Nazi officials valued social stability. As long as there was no open rebellion, everything else was fine. For the people, what mattered was safety and order, having a job to support their families and not being robbed on the streets. As for the Nazis persecuting Jews, what's it got to do with me? This was the mindset of most people under Nazi rule. Ironically, it was this apathetic mindset that allowed the Nazis to drag the German nation step by step into the abyss of war. How to understand this? As I mentioned in the previous episode, the Nazis eliminated unemployment and developed the economy by massively expanding armaments and recklessly printing money to fund military expenses, which was economically unsustainable. So, the Nazis had only one path: external expansion to plunder more resources. In fact, the Nazi Party had been doing this all along. In 1936, the German military reoccupied the Rhineland demilitarized zone. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria. In September, after seizing the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, Germany outright annexed the entire country. In March 1939, Germany forced Lithuania to cede the Memel region. These expansions helped Nazi Germany seize resources. The Rhineland was already industrially prosperous, while Austria's vast iron ore deposits, gold, and foreign reserves had long tempted the Nazis. Czechoslovakia's value was immeasurable. It ranked as the world's fifth largest industrial power with a particularly advanced arms industry.
After annexing it, Nazi Germany confiscated massive equipment: 1,000 planes, 2,000 field guns, and over 800 tanks. Essentially a windfall.
Germans initially worried about Nazi expansion, fearing Allied intervention, but relaxed as Britain and France's appeasement policies kept compromising. Over time, Germans grew numb to Hitler's war threats, since the Nazis always succeeded without consequences. When Nazi Germany issued Poland an ultimatum demanding Danzig, Germans still believed war wouldn't happen. But this time, they were wrong. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France immediately declared war, marking WWA's official outbreak. By now, Germans were filled with deep regret. The author cites a couple. The husband, Gebensleben, was an engineer and urban planner. The wife, Elizabeth, came from a wealthy farming family. They lived in Braunschweig, central Germany, with a son and daughter, a typical middle-class family. They deeply despised Weimar-era hyperinflation and believed only Nazis could save Germany. When Hitler took power, Elizabeth wrote to her daughter, calling it a historic moment. Encouraged by the Gebenslivens, their son joined the Nazi Party and worked in the economics ministry.
As Nazi Germany expanded, the Gabenslevens grew fearful, haunted by World War I's bloodshed, brutality, and severe shortages.
These memories were vivid, but appeasement, letting Hitler always escape danger, gave them the illusion war would never come. Only when their son was drafted right before the war did the family feel disaster looming. At noon on September 3rd, 1939, American journalist William Shirer joined hundreds of Germans at Berlin's Wilhelmplatz, listening to Britain's war declaration. Shirer noted that when the broadcast ended, everyone fell silent. He walked onto the streets and saw faces filled with shock and dismay. No excitement, no cheers, no celebrations, no flowers, no war frenzy or hysteria. Shirer said this was the true reaction of the German people after war broke out. It could be said Nazi rule eroded people's will and judgment. Most Germans became passive drifters, too afraid and unwilling to criticize the Nazis. And in this deep silence and widespread apathy, Germans launched humanity's most devastating war. Though World War II's smoke cleared long ago, looking back still stirs profound emotions. Finally, I'll share a quote from Protestant pastor Martin Niemöller as a conclusion. Niemöller was imprisoned in Dachau concentration camp for years until rescued by American forces. In his later years, he felt deep shame for having supported the Nazi regime. Reflecting on the pain, he realized, Niemöller spoke these words, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Social Democrats, and I did not speak out because I was not a Social Democrat. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." All right, that concludes the Third Reich in power. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.